amongst the boards all day. What's your reaction? What's going through your mind?
Well, I hate to say it, but I watch all this with a little bit of ironic amusement, Thomas, not because of any particular pleasure in watching the economics deteriorate or the markets fall, but watching everybody blame the ratings agencies or blame the government when our own government made an explicit decision 3 years ago in a financial crisis to take all of these problems from the banks and put them in the government. And now 3 years later, everybody's like, hey, you mean that decision that we made in the fall of 2008 when AIG and JP Morgan and GE were all going to get liquidated because the whole thing was proven to be an accounting fraud? And we decided to eliminate that problem by bailing them out and putting everything into the government? Oh, you mean doing that after the morphine of money printing wears off means the problem is still there? Well, guess what? The problem is still there. And until we actually, Thomas, deal with the root problem, which is that we created a pile of debt that the banks didn't have to lend, that the consumers couldn't pay. Right. And until you deal with that by restructuring the debt, like they did in 1945, right, like we did after the Civil War, like we've done countless times before, until you get that Marshall Plan, Bretton Woods mindset on, I know it's crazy, but until you actually look at the problem, you're going to have ghosts of the problem continue to show. This is like the equivalent of your alcoholic father who, right, nobody knows is an alcoholic, showing up drunk at your wedding. That's what today's stock market's like. Oh, we do have problems after all.
Well, this hot potato and this wedding's all yours then. That's going to do it for me today. I'm back tomorrow morning at 11. Thanks, Dylan. Take it away, buddy.
Thank you, Thomas. Indeed, the big story today, aftershock. We are following the breaking news at this hour. The decision to downgrade America's credit ratings, the latest trigger for a ripple across the financial markets. Good afternoon to you. I am Dylan Ratigan. A lovely Monday afternoon here in New York City. 4 p.m. on the East Coast. The closing bell is sounding on Wall Street. The S&P 500 shellacked, people. 6% in one day, 10% over 3 days. Its biggest three-day drop since November 2008. The drugs of money printing are wearing off, and the real pain of the fraudulent financial system is rearing its ugly head once again. The rout wiping out $2 trillion in value from every public company in America. Bear in mind, it was reinflated with funny money at the Fed, so easy come, easy go. The biggest concern, and the one that really matters, is the failure to invest or produce in our economy, and as a result, evidence of its slowing, combined with our politicians' inability to chart a path to prosperity, combined to create a sell-off driven not only by the S&P decision, but by those other variables, only making matters worse. And speaking of ghosts of Christmas past, we also watched our own credit rating move from AAA to AA, but also we watched today's downgrade of the government-funded housing finance companies. You've heard of them, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, where we basically create these lending vehicles to help subsidize housing. Well, U.S. banks, going back to 2008, were relieved of their toxic debt in 2008 by the government. That was the bailout, people. When Uncle Sam agreed to absorb the bank debt, that toxicity, into the government, and then those agencies at the government, then they transfer it directly to the government. Ironically, Standard & Poor's then cuts Fannie's and Freddie's AAA status today. Get this, citing their direct reliance on the U.S. government. So let's just be very clear. Banks create a bunch of money. They don't have it. They bonus themselves. We borrow it. We don't have it. The politicians love it because everybody's got a house. It's exposed for the fraud that it is in 2008. Instead of dealing with it in 2008, first President Bush, then President Obama, Larry Summers, and the whole gang print trillions of dollars to try to pretend it never happened. A few years go by, and we find ourselves with the banks fully intact, but now our government is bankrupt. Is that because we took all the bank's debt? Would seem to have a relationship, don't you think? Anyway, this afternoon, the president responded by saying all of these problems are solvable.
Markets will rise and fall, but this is the United States of America. No matter what some agency may say, we've always been and always will be a AAA country.
And to some degree, the president is correct. We do have some time and an incredible amount of resources to address our problems because the U.S. dollar is the currency of the world. The question is whether we'll have the courage to identify the true root of what ails us, or we'll simply use what time we have left to recklessly spend our way into oblivion. Let's bring in a man who has his money where his mouth is, one of the great voices through the financial crisis in 2008, and great financial authors well before that in anticipating and warning of these very problems. Your interpretation of today's events and the news of the day, Bill?
Well, Dylan, this is largely a symbolic gesture. It does not necessarily impact anything in finance other than potentially some collateral requirements, and that's not really going to come into play. Well, what it can impact is confidence. And all markets, and the prices in all markets, have a confidence element to them. So confidence is shaken. But as a catalyst, what it does is it focuses people on the fact that the debts of this country that are the problem are not just our $14 trillion in outstanding debt. The future unfunded liabilities, as we see, causing bankruptcies in small municipalities around the country, is the real problem. So this is the starter's pistol to say that we don't get to kick the can down the road anymore. This has been which has been the policy, and since 2008, in 2009, we did all the things you just said. In that interim time, when we saved the financial system by bailing it out via the government and the Federal Reserve, we did exactly nothing. So we got nothing done during our do-over time, and now confidence has been shattered again because we have failed to address these long-term issues. As you and I have discussed in the past, it was always going to take another crisis to force the incompetent politicians that reside in Washington, D.C. from both parties, who both created this mess over 20 or 30 years, to get down to work and start to solve the problems that we have. They will not go away by blaming the other side.
I want to bring Bill Black into this conversation. Bill Fleckenstein, hang on one second. I want to get him in here. Bill Black is a former bank regulator, now associate professor of economics and law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He was a critical figure in exposing the corruption during the savings and loan crisis. We had a tremendous amount of corruption and fraud potentially exposed in 2008. It was instead covered up by virtue of money printing and so-called prosecutorial discretion, as they tell me, at the Department of Justice, Bill Black. But how is it that we can take the credit ratings downgrade of our own country by S&P seriously, knowing that we absorbed the debts of the banks in 2008 to create this problem in the first place?
Well, and even worse, S&P and its sister organizations were absolutely essential in creating the crisis on the way up by giving AAA rating to stuff that was known to be, it was called in the trade toxic waste, and which the Mortgage Bankers Association anti-fraud unit called in 2006, and the Mortgage Bankers Association is the trade association of the perps. It called liars' loans an open invitation to fraudsters and said that 90% of liars' loans were fraudulent. By 2006, roughly 30% of all mortgage loans in the United States were liars' loans. And S&P, Fitch, Moody's gave AAA to every single one of the top tranche of those issuances. So if you don't get those lies by S&P, you don't get the crisis. And you're right, Attorney General Holder has continued Attorney General Mukasey under Bush's policy that you can defraud the United States of America with impunity if you are politically powerful and make large political contributions.
Bill Fleckenstein, that alone, what Mr. Black just described, is a good reason to shake confidence when there's evidence that you can defraud the U.S. government with impunity using the banking system and banking fraud and will not be prosecuted. You have told me many times at the root of this entire issue, Bill Fleckenstein, is accounting fraud. What do you mean when you say that, and how did the rating agency's decision to validate all of this over the past decade lead us to this conversation today?
Well, when I say accounting fraud, what I mean is, in the financial system, the way the books are kept and the, mark-to-market accounting, and we had level 1 and 2 or 3 accounting, all of those types of things. Perhaps if I said it was fraud, it is a little strong of a word because it was technically maybe legal and it made enough gray areas that there was maybe not
fair enough.
Prima facie fraud, but it essentially was not true. It allowed the financial companies, and that's where all the rot was, to basically report whatever they wanted to. And so a lot of these problems were sort of hidden. I mean, they were there, but you couldn't really get a sense of what they were. So, and then we get back to the regulators not having done their job, the Fed doing what they did. I mean, there's a lot of reasons we're in this mess. The question is, what are we going to do to get out of it?
And Bill Black, where do you begin to answer that question?
Well, first, it was fraud, and it is prosecutable. And in the savings and loan crisis, for very similar actions, we were able to convict for felonies over 1,000 elite business people. And so it is a scandal that we haven't done it here. First thing we need to do here is to stop lying. Right? So when this crisis hit, we didn't just bail them out. We hid it off balance sheet. So we own, for example, 79.9% of Fannie and Freddie, so we don't have to consolidate their debt into the United States for recognition purposes. That's a pure scam. We changed the accounting rules so that banks don't have to recognize the losses. But that just allows the losses to fester and makes them bigger, and it means that you have all these zombie major institutions like Bank of America going around committing one fraud after another in the foreclosure process.
Hang on Bill Fleckenstein, hang on 1 second. Go ahead, Bill Black.
All right, so you've got pervasive fraud that causes the crisis. The government responds to fraud with its own fraud about lying about things. I mean, Timmy Geithner has been going around for 3 years now, roughly, saying, boy, I solved the entire crisis for virtually nothing by using smoke and mirrors. Well, the markets are telling you you didn't solve the crisis. But you also mentioned the problems of the states and localities. We need to remember that the original stimulus bill had a good Republican idea in it adopted by President Obama. And that Republican idea was revenue sharing. Everybody sentient knew that there was a crisis coming in states and localities, and that it was critical that we fund it from the federal government. That was in the bill. Yeah. Republicans and blue dog conservative Democrats insisted on killing it, and the Obama administration gave up without a fight in a single day.
Bill Fleckenstein, understanding the complexity and layering, almost Roman, in the breach of integrity and values on every level of the financial system, where would you recommend we begin the process of reconciling this debt and beginning to work our way through it towards prosperity?
Well, somehow you have to have an honest accounting. I mean, it's so hard when we've got these politicians so polarized. The public has to be made aware, hey, look, we got a $50-60 billion unfunded liability. It's not going away. We have to get at, solving a lot of these problems. We have to close tax loopholes. I mean, I could give it to you simplistically. We need flat tax, tort reform, term limits, and then maybe we have a chance. But to get from here to there and the problems in between, we have to means test Social Security. There's a lot of, everybody's got to have to give up something. And I don't see how, my problem is, I know the crisis will get big enough to start to solve these problems. I don't think they're insolvable. So I don't know how to get the politicians to wake up and face the problem and stop being Democrats or Republicans and just say, we have to solve this.
Yeah. Listen, I suspect that the three of us will be having these conversations for a few weeks, if not months, to come. I appreciate both you, Bill Fleckenstein on the phone and Bill Black in studio, as we now deal with the echo effect of the bailouts of 2008 that were predicated on toxicity and fraud, the cover-up of those bailouts that was predicated on toxicity and fraud, and the imminent unraveling of the totality of those things as a result of our own governments running out of ways to cover it up, and yet still there is not investment, production, or jobs in this country. It is clear there is another way. We just have to find it.